Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her gloved hand against the smooth surface of the ancient laboratory wall, feeling the subtle vibrations that spoke of technology far beyond human understanding. The xenoarchaeology team had been working on Kepler 442c for 3 months now, excavating what appeared to be a research facility buried beneath 2 million years of sediment and time. Every day brought new mysteries, new impossibilities that challenged everything they thought they knew about galactic history. Eleanor, you need to see this. Dr. James Chen's voice carried an edge of excitement mixed with something else, something that might have been fear. His words echoed through the vast underground chamber they had dubbed the Genesis Lab, a name that now seemed prophetic in ways none of them had anticipated. She made her way through the maze of crystalline equipment and organic-looking machinery that defied classification. The facility was a hybrid of technologies that should not have been able to coexist. Quantum computers grown from living coral, gravity manipulators that pulsed like hearts, atmosphere processors that breathed like lungs. Everything here suggested a level of biotechnology that made their most advanced AI systems look like stone tools. Chen stood before a massive transparent cylinder that rose from floor to ceiling, easily 15 feet in diameter. Inside, suspended in what appeared to be a perfectly clear preservation medium, floated a figure that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. At first glance, it appeared to be wearing some sort of environmental suit, sleek, form-fitting, obviously advanced. But as she moved closer, details began to resolve that made her stomach clench with unease. The suit wasn't mechanical. It was organic, grown rather than manufactured, with a surface that shifted between metallic and flesh-like depending on the angle of observation. Neural pathways were visible beneath its surface, pulsing with a dim bioluminescence that suggested the thing was still alive, or had been until very recently. But it was the face, visible through the transparent helmet, that made Elena's scientific objectivity crumble into something approaching primal terror. The face was human. Not humanoid, not roughly human-like in the way that convergent evolution might produce. It was specifically, unmistakably human, a middle-aged woman with Asian features, high cheekbones, and an expression of serene concentration frozen in time. Elena could count the individual eyelashes, could see the subtle asymmetry in the eyebrows that marked this as a real face, not some artistic interpretation of humanity. Jesus Christ, Elena whispered, her scientific training warring with the impossibility before her eyes. How is this possible? Humans haven't even had spaceflight for 200 years, and this facility is millions of years old. Chen moved to another cylinder, his face pale in the blue-green light emanating from the preservation systems. There are dozens of them. Different ethnicities, different ages, but all unmistakably human. Some appear to be in military gear, others in what might be scientific equipment, a few in what I can only describe as formal wear. Elena forced herself to move methodically from cylinder to cylinder, cataloguing what she saw with the detached precision her training demanded, even as her worldview crumbled around her. Here was a tall man, with African features and scars that suggested a warrior's life. There was a child who couldn't have been more than 12, preserved with the same care as the adults, wearing what appeared to be some sort of ceremonial robes. An elderly woman with Native American features held what looked like a staff or scepter, her face bearing an expression of profound wisdom. The genetic scanners confirm it, Chen said, his voice hollow. These aren't just humanoid. The DNA is human DNA, with some modifications we don't understand yet, but the base genetic code is identical to ours down to the smallest markers. These are our people, Elena. Somehow, impossibly, these are our people. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If these were humans preserved in a facility that predated human civilization by millions of years, then everything they understood about human evolution, about their place in the universe, about the very nature of reality itself, was fundamentally wrong. She thought about the Galactic Council, the dozens of species that made up the known universe's civilization, all of whom shared certain basic physiological similarities: bilateral symmetry, similar organ placement, compatible blood chemistry. The xenobiologists had always attributed this to convergent evolution, the idea that intelligent life naturally evolved along similar lines. But what if it wasn't convergent evolution? What if all of these species were based on a template? What if that template was human? Chen, start recording everything. Full spectrum analysis, genetic sampling if possible, complete documentation of the preservation systems. I want to know how these systems work, how long they've been active, and most importantly, who built them. She moved to the central control console, an organic-looking structure that seemed to grow directly from the floor. As her hands approached, the surface began to glow, responding to her presence in ways that suggested it was designed for human operators. Symbols began to appear on the surface, not the angular mathematical construct she expected from an alien civilization, but flowing scripts that seemed almost familiar, as if she had seen them in dreams. Elena, the preservation medium in these cylinders isn't just maintaining the bodies. According to these readings, it's actively repairing cellular damage, maintaining neural activity, even running what appear to be memory engrams. These people aren't dead. They're in some sort of suspended animation. The console under her hands pulsed with warmth, and suddenly the chamber was filled with sound. Not the mechanical hum of machinery, but something organic, rhythmic, almost like breathing. The lights in the room shifted to a warmer spectrum, and Elena realized that the facility was coming online, responding to their presence, recognizing them as authorized users. "We need to contact Earth immediately," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was impossible. They were in the Kepler system, 47 light-years from home. Even with quantum communication, the message would take months to reach Earth Command, and the response would take just as long. A new sound filled the chamber. Soft at first, but growing louder. It was a voice, speaking in what sounded like ancient Latin mixed with languages Elena didn't recognize, but somehow she understood the meaning. The facility's central intelligence was conducting a systems check, verifying the status of its charges, preparing for something it called the Awakening Protocol. "Chen, whatever we do, we can't let the Galactic Council know about this. Not yet. If they discover that humans are somehow the original template for galactic civilization, if they learn that we predate their entire concept of evolutionary development by millions of years," she didn't finish the thought. The implications were too vast, too dangerous. The political structure of the galaxy was built on the assumption that humans were newcomers, a young species that had stumbled into spaceflight through luck and determination. They were barely tolerated members of the Galactic Council, given minimal voting rights and treated as curiosities by species that claimed millions of years of civilization. But if humans were the original template, if their genetic code was the foundation from which all other intelligent species had been derived, then everything changed. Some species would demand to know how humans had seeded the galaxy with their genetic material. Others would see it as proof of human superiority, a justification for conquest or domination. The more paranoid species might decide that humans were a threat that needed to be eliminated before they reclaimed their apparent birthright as the progenitors of galactic civilization. A soft chime filled the air, and one of the preservation cylinders began to cycle through what appeared to be a revival sequence. The fluid inside began to drain, and the figure within, the Asian woman Elena had first noticed, began to show signs of returning consciousness. "Elena, the bio readings are off the charts. Brain activity is increasing, motor functions are initializing, but there's something else. The neural patterns don't match anything in our database." It's as if her brain has been enhanced, modified in ways we can't even begin to understand. The cylinder opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, and the woman inside took her first breath in millions of years. Her eyes opened, focused immediately on Elena with an intensity that suggested complete awareness despite her long sleep. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, speaking in perfect English with an accent Elena couldn't place. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenoarchaeologist, Earth Colonial Survey Division. You're exactly on schedule." Elena's blood ran cold. This woman knew her name, knew her profession, knew details about her life that should have been impossible for anyone outside of Earth Command to possess. "Who are you? How do you know who I am?" The woman stepped gracefully from the cylinder, moving with a fluid precision that suggested enhanced reflexes and perfect physical conditioning. Her environmental suit began to shift and change, adapting to the chamber's atmosphere, revealing more of her human features while maintaining its protective properties. "My name is Dr. P. Sarah Chen, though I suspect Dr. James Chen there is descended from my brother's line, given the facial structure and genetic markers I'm reading. I am what you would call a guardian, one of the original human colonization team sent to prepare the galaxy for our species' eventual expansion into space." Elena felt reality shift around her like sand in an hourglass. "Colonization team? That's impossible. Humans have only been spacefaring for 2 centuries. This facility is millions of years old. Time is more fluid than your current science understands, Dr. Vasquez. We were sent backward through time as well as outward through space, charged with seeding the galaxy with human-compatible life forms and establishing the infrastructure necessary for humanity's future expansion. Every species you know, every member of the Galactic Council, was derived from human genetic templates and guided through their evolutionary development by teams like mine. Chen stepped forward, his scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before his eyes. You're saying that humans created all the other intelligent species in the galaxy? That we somehow went back in time and played God with entire worlds? Not played God, Doctor. Chen, we followed a very specific plan, developed by your future selves. Humanity in your timeline develops time travel technology approximately 300 years from your current date. Once the technology is perfected, the decision is made to ensure humanity's survival by seeding the galaxy with compatible species and establishing a galactic civilization that would be ready to welcome humanity when they achieve natural spaceflight. Sarah moved to the central console, her hands dancing across controls that responded to her touch with obvious familiarity. Displays lit up throughout the chamber, showing star maps that covered the entire galaxy. Red markers indicated what Elena now realized were Guardian stations, hundreds of them scattered across thousands of worlds. Blue markers showed the locations of the species they had created and guided. Every single member race of the Galactic Council was marked, along with dozens of others that hadn't yet achieved spaceflight. The Altarians? With their perfect mathematical minds? Enhanced human genetics with modified neural structures. The Centauran traders with their instinct for commerce. Human social drives amplified and focused. The warrior culture of the Talcetians. Human competitive instincts refined and channeled into a species-wide military tradition. Every species you've encountered is humanity expressing different aspects of its potential. Elena sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling from the implications. But why? Why create all these different species instead of just colonizing the galaxy directly? Because humanity in your timeline learns that direct expansion leads to stagnation and eventual extinction. A galaxy populated by a single species, no matter how advanced, becomes trapped by its own success. But a galaxy populated by dozens of species derived from human potential, each developing different strengths and perspectives, creates a robust civilization capable of surviving any crisis. Another cylinder began its revival cycle, and Elena watched as a tall man with clearly military bearing began to awaken. Then another and another. The chamber filled with the soft sounds of revival as dozens of Guardians returned to consciousness after their long sleep. Why now? Elena asked. Why are you awakening now? Sarah's expression grew grave. Because the Devourers have returned to this galaxy, and humanity's emergence into galactic politics has been accelerated by approximately 50 years. The timeline has been disrupted, and we must guide you through the crisis that is coming. Devourers? The species that forced humanity to develop time travel in the first place. They consume civilizations, not just planets or resources, but the very concept of intelligence itself. They turn thinking beings into components of a vast hive mind that spans multiple galaxies. Your future selves discovered their approach and sent us back to prepare defenses. The man with military bearing stepped forward, his uniform shifting to adapt to the chamber's environment. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Chen, you need to understand that everything you've discovered here changes not just your understanding of history, but your species' future survival. The Galactic Council as it exists now will not be sufficient to face what's coming. They need to know the truth about their origins, about humanity's role in their existence, and about the threat that approaches. Elena looked around the chamber, at the awakening Guardians, at the impossible technology that surrounded them, at the star maps showing a galaxy secretly shaped by human hands across millions of years. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical presence. What do you need us to do? Sarah activated a new display, showing the real-time positions of Galactic Council fleets and the approaching darkness at the galaxy's edge, where long-range sensors had detected something vast and hostile moving between the stars. First, we help you understand the technology we've left behind. Then, we prepare humanity to take its rightful place as the leaders of the civilization we created. And finally, we teach the galaxy to fight as one species, because that's what they truly are. Different expressions of the same human potential, scattered across the stars and waiting to come home. 3 days after the first awakening, the Genesis Lab had transformed from an archaeological site into a bustling command center. Dozens of Guardians had emerged from their preservation chambers, each bringing with them knowledge that spanned millions of years and technologies that made Elena's most advanced equipment look primitive. The chamber hummed with activity as ancient systems came online. Quantum computers grown from living crystal began processing vast amounts of data, and communication arrays that had been silent for eons started reaching out across the galaxy. Elena stood before a holographic display that showed the real-time status of every Guardian station in the galaxy. Of the 347 original installations, only 63 were still operational. The others had been discovered and destroyed over the millennia by various species, usually by accident, though some showed signs of deliberate sabotage. Each destroyed station represented millions of years of preparation and monitoring lost forever. Dr. Vasquez, we need to discuss the immediate tactical situation, said Commander Marcus Rivera, one of the military guardians who had awakened on the second day. His presence carried an authority that transcended rank or position. This was a man who had volunteered to sleep for millions of years in order to protect a species that hadn't even achieved spaceflight when he went into suspension. The Devourers have already begun their preliminary scouting operations, Rivera continued, gesturing to the holographic display. Long-range sensors show probe vessels at the galaxy's edge, testing our defensive networks and cataloging population centers. They're using the same tactics they employed in the Andromeda consumption 50,000 years ago. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Andromeda consumption? Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from a biological analysis station where she had been studying genetic samples from various Galactic Council species. The Andromeda galaxy was completely consumed approximately 50,000 years ago. Every intelligent species, every civilization, every trace of independent thought was absorbed into the Devourer collective. When they finished, they moved on to the Magellanic Clouds. This galaxy is their next target. The implications were staggering. Elena had studied xenobiology for 15 years, had catalogued dozens of species across the local galactic arm, and never once had anyone mentioned the complete destruction of entire galaxies. Why doesn't anyone know about this? Surely someone would have detected the disappearance of an entire galaxy's worth of civilizations. Because the Devourers don't just consume civilizations, explained Dr. Crow. Liu Wei, a guardian who specialized in temporal mechanics. They consume the very memory of their existence. They erase species from history itself, making it as if they had never existed. The only reason we know about Andromeda is because we were outside the normal time stream when it happened. Rivera activated another display showing the current disposition of Galactic Council forces. The various species had arranged their fleets in traditional defensive patterns around their homeworlds and major colonies, preparing for conventional warfare against conventional enemies. It was a formation that would have been adequate against any known threat in the galaxy, but completely useless against an enemy that could rewrite the fundamental nature of reality. The Council is preparing for the wrong kind of war, Rivera said grimly. They're thinking in terms of territorial conquest, resource competition, technological advantage. The Devourers don't want our planets or our technology. They want our consciousness itself. Every thinking being becomes part of their collective, every unique perspective absorbed into their vast mental network. Eleanor studied the tactical displays, trying to comprehend a threat so vast it defied imagination. How do we fight something like that? If they can erase civilizations from history itself, how did humanity in our timeline even learn about them? Doctor, Chen moved to a biological display showing complex genetic structures that seemed to shift and change even as Elena watched. Because your future selves developed something the Devourers had never encountered before, a genetic sequence that makes human consciousness fundamentally incompatible with their collective absorption process. We call it the independence gene. The what? Human beings have a unique capacity for independent thought that goes beyond simple free will. It's written into your DNA at the most fundamental level. A stubborn insistence on individual identity that makes you literally impossible to fully absorb. The Devourers can consume human bodies, but human consciousness resists integration into their collective. Dr. Liu Wei activated a new display showing genetic comparisons between baseline humans and the various Galactic Council species. Elena could see immediately that while the Council species shared most of their genetic structure with humanity, they were all missing certain key sequences. When we created the various species that became the Galactic Council, we deliberately removed or modified the independence gene sequences, Liu continued. We needed them to be capable of cooperation on a scale that baseline humanity often struggles with. The Altarians can think collectively when necessary. The Centaurians naturally form trade networks that span solar systems. The Tausetians can coordinate military operations across vast distances without traditional communication. But that also made them vulnerable to the Devourers, Elena said, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. Precisely. Every species we created is more psychologically compatible with collective thinking than baseline humans. The very traits that make them excellent at building galactic civilization also make them susceptible to absorption by the Devourer Collective. Rivera pulled up another display, this one showing timeline projections based on current Devourer advancement rates. According to our calculations, the main Devourer fleet will arrive at the galactic core in approximately 18 months. By that time, humanity needs to be in position to coordinate the defense of every Council species, because we're the only ones who can resist their primary weapon.
Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical presence.
You're saying that humanity, the youngest and least advanced species in the galaxy, needs to take military command of the entire Galactic Council?
Not just military command, Sarah said.
Complete command. Political, military, scientific, cultural, everything. The Council species will need to surrender their independence temporarily and follow human leadership absolutely, or they will be absorbed one by one. The thought was terrifying. Humanity had spent 2 centuries struggling to be accepted as equals in galactic society. The idea of demanding absolute authority over species with millions of years of advancement would be seen as the ultimate expression of human arrogance. They'll never agree to that, Elena said. The Council sees us as barely civilized newcomers. Some species still debate whether we should even have voting rights. Which is why we need to reveal the truth about their origins, Rivera said. Every Council species needs to learn that they are derived from human genetics, that their entire civilization was planned and guided by human intervention, that humanity is not their equal but their creator. Dr. Chen activated a communication array that had been silent for millions of years. Signals began reaching out across the galaxy, contacting the remaining Guardian stations, checking on the status of the various species they had created and guided. Most of the responses were routine updates on population growth, technological development, and cultural evolution. But several stations reported disturbing anomalies. The Guardian station monitoring the Rigel sector reports complete loss of contact with the Rigelian Empire 3 months ago, Sarah reported.
No distress signals, no evidence of warfare, no natural disasters.
7 billion Rigelians and their entire interstellar infrastructure simply vanished. Elena's blood ran cold. The Devourers? Almost certainly. They're not waiting for the main invasion. They're conducting surgical strikes against isolated populations, testing their absorption techniques, gathering intelligence about current galactic defensive capabilities. Rivera brought up a new tactical display showing the last known positions of the missing Rigelian fleets. The Rigelians were one of our success stories, a species designed for rapid technological advancement and aggressive expansion. If the Devourers can absorb them completely without anyone even noticing, then our timeline estimates are wrong. The invasion has already begun. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena stared at the holographic displays showing a galaxy under siege by an enemy that could make entire civilizations disappear without a trace. The comfortable academic world of xenoarchaeology seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a reality that demanded immediate action on an unimaginable scale. "What's our first step?" she asked. Sarah moved to the central command console, her hands dancing across controls that had been waiting millions of years for this moment. "We contact Earth and inform them of the situation. Then we begin the Revelation Protocol. Systematic disclosure of the truth to each Council species, starting with the most psychologically prepared. The Altarians," Rivera said immediately. "Their mathematical minds can process paradigm shifts better than most. They'll be able to accept the truth about their origins and help us convince the others." Elena watched as communication arrays throughout the chamber began reaching out across the galaxy, sending carefully crafted messages to specific individuals within each species. Guardians who had been placed in positions of influence over the millennia, their true nature hidden even from themselves until activation codes awakened their suppressed memories. "Dr. Vasquez, you need to understand that once we begin this process, there's no going back," Sarah said. "The revelation of human involvement in galactic civilization will trigger massive political upheavals. Some species will embrace their human heritage, others will see it as deception or conquest. Wars may break out between those who accept human leadership and those who reject it. And if we don't reveal the truth, then the Devourers will absorb the galaxy species by species, and humanity will find itself fighting alone against an enemy that has already consumed the consciousness of every other intelligent being in local space." Elena looked around the chamber at the awakening Guardians, at the impossible technology that surrounded them, at the star maps showing a galaxy secretly shaped by human hands across millions of years. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Begin the Revelation Protocol. Sarah nodded, and activated a galaxy-wide communication network that had been dormant for millions of years. Across thousands of worlds, hidden Guardian stations began broadcasting carefully crafted messages to the leaders of every Galactic Council species. The messages were simple, direct, and accompanied by genetic evidence that could not be disputed. People of the galaxy, the time has come to learn the truth about your origins. You are not separate species that evolved independently on different worlds. You are all children of humanity, created and guided across millions of years to build the civilization that now spans the stars. Your creators have awakened from their long sleep because a threat approaches that will destroy everything we have built together. We ask not for your submission but for your trust. We ask not for your worship, but for your cooperation. We are your family, separated by time and space, but united by blood and purpose. And together we will face what comes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Communication channels across the galaxy erupted with demands for explanation, angry denials, requests for proof, and in some cases, expressions of relief that finally made sense of historical anomalies that had puzzled xenobiologists for centuries. On Altair Prime, the ruling council of mathematicians immediately began analyzing the genetic data, their enhanced minds processing the implications faster than any other species could have managed. Within hours, they had verified the accuracy of the human genetic markers in their own DNA and had begun developing mathematical models for the logistics of such a massive undertaking. On Centauri, the Merchant Guild saw immediately the commercial implications of being related to humanity, the species that had revolutionized galactic trade with their innovative approaches to economics and resource management. They began calculating the profit potential of closer cooperation with their genetic cousins. But on Tau Ceti, the warrior clans reacted with fury, seeing the revelation as evidence that their entire martial tradition was nothing more than human genetic programming. Several clan leaders declared blood feuds against humanity, demanding satisfaction for the deception that had shaped their entire culture. The reactions are about what we expected, Rivera reported. Acceptance, curiosity, anger, and confusion in roughly equal measures. But the important thing is that they're taking it seriously. No one is dismissing the evidence as fabrication. Dr. Chen looked up from her monitoring station. We're receiving responses from the Hidden Guardians. Awakening protocols are activating across 47 worlds. Our people are revealing themselves and beginning to provide direct assistance to local governments. Eleanor watched the real-time updates flowing across the holographic displays. The galaxy was transforming before her eyes as hidden truths emerged from the shadows of history. Ancient mysteries were being explained, technological puzzles were being solved, and the true scope of human achievement across millions of years was finally being revealed. But even as the revelation protocol proceeded, the long-range sensors continued to track the approaching darkness at the galaxy's edge. The Devourers were coming, and now the galaxy knew both the magnitude of the threat and the true nature of their only hope for survival. How long before the first face-to-face meetings? Elena asked. The Altarian delegation is already en route, Sarah replied. They should arrive within 72 hours. The Centaurans are organizing a merchant fleet to bring trade goods and negotiation specialists. The Tausetians, well, they're sending their most elite warriors, though we're not entirely sure whether they're coming to pledge allegiance or challenge us to combat. Elena smiled grimly. I suppose we'll find out when they get here. The holographic display flickered, and suddenly Elena was looking at Earth, her homeworld spinning peacefully in space, unaware that its children had just claimed dominion over an entire galaxy. In a few hours, the quantum communicators would deliver news that would transform human civilization forever. They were no longer the newcomers struggling for acceptance in galactic society. They were the founders, the creators, the parents of every intelligent species among the stars. And they were the galaxy's only hope for survival. The Altarian delegation arrived exactly 72 hours after the Revelation Protocol began, their crystalline ship settling into orbit around Kepler 442c with mathematical precision that spoke of calculations performed across interstellar distances. Eleanor stood in the newly constructed diplomatic chamber, watching through the transparent walls as the shuttle descended toward the landing platform that the Guardians had grown from the planet's living rock in just 3 days. The chamber itself was a marvel of biotechnology that defied human understanding of physics. The walls were transparent aluminum that had been cultivated like a garden, growing into perfect geometric shapes that provided both structural integrity and aesthetic beauty. The furniture appeared to be carved from single pieces of living wood that continued to photosynthesize, providing fresh oxygen and a subtle, pleasant fragrance that helped calm nervous systems.
Remember, Dr. Joe
Vasquez, the Altarians process information differently than baseline humans, Doctor, Sarah Chen said, reviewing the diplomatic protocols on her bio-integrated tablet. Their enhanced neural networks allow them to consider dozens of probability matrices simultaneously. They don't make emotional decisions, but they do value logical consistency above all else.
Elena nodded, adjusting the formal diplomatic attire that the Guardians had provided, clothing that adapted to the wearer's body temperature and stress levels while projecting an aura of authority through subtle biomechanical enhancements.
She had spent the last 3 days absorbing crash courses in xenodiplomacy, Guardian history, and the specific psychological profiles of each Galactic Council species. The amount of information was overwhelming, but the enhanced learning techniques the Guardians used made it possible to process years' worth of knowledge in just days. Commander Rivera stood near the chamber's tactical displays, monitoring the approaching shuttle and the larger Altarian fleet that remained in orbit. Their ship configuration suggests they came prepared for either peaceful negotiation or immediate warfare, he observed. The lead vessel is their diplomatic flagship, but those escort ships are carrying enough firepower to sterilize this planet. Standard Altarian procedure, Dr. Chen said. They calculate all possible outcomes and prepare for the most likely scenarios. The fact that they brought both diplomatic and military assets doesn't necessarily indicate hostile intent, just thorough preparation. The shuttle touched down on the landing platform with barely a whisper of displaced air, its crystalline hull reflecting the alien sunset in patterns that seemed to shift and dance with mathematical precision. The passengers who emerged were immediately recognizable as Altarian, despite the environmental suits they wore. Tall, slender figures with elongated skulls that housed their enhanced brains, pale skin that showed the tracery of neural pathways beneath the surface, and eyes that seemed to process visual information with computer-like efficiency. There were 3 of them, which Elena knew from her briefings was the standard Altarian decision-making unit. One would be a data analyst, responsible for processing and verifying information. One would be a probability calculator, responsible for determining the most likely outcomes of various courses of action. The third would be a synthesis coordinator, responsible for combining the input from the other 2 into actionable decisions. As they entered the diplomatic chamber, Elena could see the moment when they recognized the human faces of the Guardians. There was no visible emotional reaction, but their biomonitors showed elevated neural activity as their enhanced brains began processing the implications of seeing confirmed genetic relatives for the first time. The lead Altarian removed her environmental helmet, revealing features that were unmistakably derived from human genetics, but refined and enhanced through millions of years of guided evolution. Her skull was larger than baseline human normal, housing a brain that could process information at superhuman speeds. Her skin was pale and almost translucent, showing the tracery of enhanced neural pathways that allowed different regions of her brain to communicate with unprecedented efficiency. But her eyes, her facial structure, the basic geometry of her features, these were recognizably human. I am primary calculator Zara 7. 432, she said, her voice carrying the precise diction that characterized Altarian speech. I represent the mathematical collective of Altair Prime. We have analyzed the genetic data provided in your revelation protocol. The probability of fabrication is less than 0.00001%. We accept the accuracy of your claims regarding our genetic origins. Elena felt a moment of relief. The first hurdle had been cleared. The Altarians believed the evidence and were willing to proceed with negotiations. Elena Vasquez, representing Earth Colonial Survey Division and acting as liaison to the Guardian Council. Elena replied, using the formal introduction protocols she had memorized.
Thank you for coming.
We understand that this information challenges many fundamental assumptions about galactic history. Challenges is an inadequate term, said the second Altarian, who introduced himself as data analyst Kryn. 156. Your revelation necessitates complete recalculation of our historical models, sociological frameworks, and strategic planning systems. The implications extend far beyond simple genetic heritage. The third Altarian, synthesist coordinator Vel 3, 891, activated a holographic display device that projected detailed star charts and genetic analyses into the space between them. We have verified the human genetic markers in our own population and cross-referenced them with historical anomalies that previously defied explanation. The mathematical models support your claims about guided evolution and civilizational development. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her Guardian uniform adapting to project a more formal appearance. Coordinator Vel, we understand that this information is difficult to process. We want to be completely transparent about the scope of Guardian intervention in Altarian development. The holographic display shifted to show Altair Prime's evolutionary history, but now with Guardian interventions clearly marked. Elena could see specific points where genetic modifications had been introduced, where technological developments had been quietly guided, where cultural shifts had been influenced by Guardian agents working behind the scenes. Your species was derived from human genetic templates approximately 2.3 million years ago, Sarah continued. The base genetics emphasized mathematical processing ability, logical consistency, and collaborative decision-making. Guardian agents have provided subtle guidance at 47 key points in your civilizational development, primarily to accelerate technological advancement and prevent self-destructive conflicts. Primary calculator Zara studied the data with obvious fascination rather than offense. The genetic modifications explain several anomalies in our neurological development. Our enhanced computational abilities always seem too sophisticated to have evolved naturally within our species' time frame. Guardian intervention provides a logical explanation. Elena realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, the first meeting between a created species and their creators. The Altarians were processing the revelation with the same analytical precision they brought to any complex problem. But she could see subtle signs of emotional impact, despite their logical demeanor. Their biomonitors showed elevated stress responses, and their normally perfect posture showed slight variations that suggested internal conflict. Commander Rivera activated the chamber's tactical displays, showing the current disposition of galactic defenses and the approaching Devourer threat. Calculator Zara, we need to discuss the immediate tactical situation. The Revelation Protocol was not initiated for historical interest, but because of an existential threat to all galactic civilization. The Altarian delegation studied the tactical data with obvious alarm, their enhanced brains processing the implications faster than baseline humans could have managed. Elena could see them performing rapid calculations, analyzing probability matrices, and coming to conclusions that clearly disturbed them. The Devourers represent a class of threat we have never modeled, data analyst Kryn said. Our current defensive strategies are predicated on conventional warfare between material civilizations. An enemy that can absorb consciousness itself and erase civilizations from history requires completely different tactical approaches, which is why we need unified command under human leadership, Rivera said bluntly. Every council species is vulnerable to Devourer absorption techniques. Only baseline humans possess the genetic independence necessary to resist their consciousness integration protocols. Elena watched the Altarians process this information. She could see them running probability calculations, analyzing the logical implications, and coming to conclusions that their enhanced rational minds could accept, even if their cultural pride resisted. You are requesting that the Altarian collective surrender military autonomy to human command? Synthesis Coordinator Val asked. Not requesting, Sarah said gently. We're explaining the tactical reality. The Devourers have already begun their preliminary strikes. The Regelian Empire was completely absorbed 3 months ago. 7 billion individuals whose existence has been erased so completely that most of the galaxy hasn't even noticed their disappearance. The Altarians exchanged rapid communications in their mathematical language, processing data and reaching decisions faster than human conversation could follow. Finally, primary calculator Zara turned back to the Guardian delegation. The mathematical analysis is clear. Resistance under current command structures has a success probability of less than 12%. Integration under human command increases success probability to approximately 60 to 7%. The logical choice is obvious. Elena felt a surge of hope. If the Altarians could accept human leadership, other species might follow their example. However, Zara continued, implementation will require solutions to several complex problems. The Tausesian warrior clans have declared blood feuds against humanity over the revelation of genetic manipulation. The Centauran trade guilds are calculating the economic implications of closer human cooperation. The Andromedan refugees will need to be convinced that humans can protect them from the same fate that befell their galaxy. Andromedan refugees? Elena asked. I thought Andromeda was completely consumed. Dr. Chen activated a new display showing long-range sensor data from the galactic edge. Approximately 50,000 Andromedans escaped the consumption by fleeing to intergalactic space. They've been surviving in modified generation ships for the last 50,000 years, but their resources are nearly exhausted. They sent an advanced delegation to our galaxy 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Rivera said grimly. Which means they arrived just before the Regelian disappearance. The Devourers may have followed their trail here. The tactical implications hit Elena like a physical blow. The Devourers weren't just expanding their territory. They were pursuing the last survivors of their previous conquest. The galaxy wasn't just under threat. It was being specifically targeted because it had offered refuge to Andromedan survivors. The Andromedans possessed direct knowledge of Devourer capabilities and tactics, Zara observed. Their cooperation would significantly improve defensive planning. However, they will require convincing that this galaxy can provide better protection than their current nomadic existence. Which brings us back to the problem of unified command, Rivera said. Every species needs to understand that survival depends on human leadership, but each species will resist for different reasons. The Altarians accept logical necessity, but the Tausetians see genetic manipulation as dishonor. The Centaurans will want economic guarantees. The Andromedans need proof of defensive capability. Alina studied the holographic displays showing the vast complexity of galactic civilization, hundreds of worlds, dozens of species, trillions of individuals, all needing to be convinced to surrender their independence to a species they had considered primitive just days earlier. "What's our timeline?" she asked. Sarah consulted her bio-integrated chronometer. The Centauran delegation arrives tomorrow. The Tausetian fleet will be here in 5 days. The Andromedan advance ships are already in the outer system, maintaining position and observing. Each meeting will be more complex than the last. And the Devourers? Long-range sensors show increased activity at the galactic edge. We estimate 18 months before the main fleet arrives, but advanced scout forces could begin systematic probing in as little as 6 months. Elena looked around the diplomatic chamber at the Guardians, who had sacrificed millions of years to protect a species that hadn't even achieved spaceflight when they went into suspension. She thought about the revealed truth of galactic civilization, that every intelligent species among the stars was family, separated by time and genetic modification, but united by common origin and purpose. And she thought about the approaching darkness that threatened to erase not just their lives, but their very existence from the memory of the universe. "Then we'd better make sure these negotiations succeed," she said, "because if we can't unite the galaxy under human leadership, there won't be a galaxy left to save." Primary calculator Zara studied Elena with those enhanced eyes that seemed to process information at superhuman speeds. "Dr. Vasquez, the Altarian Collective has reached a decision. We will formally recognize human authority over galactic defense operations. Our fleets, our technology, our computational resources, all will be placed at your disposal." Elena felt the weight of that commitment settle on her shoulders. The Altarians commanded one of the most advanced technological bases in the galaxy. Their mathematical minds could solve problems that would take other species years to even understand. And they had just voluntarily surrendered their independence to a species that most of the galaxy still considered newcomers. "Thank you, Calculator Zara. Your trust won't be misplaced." "It is not trust, Dr. Vasquez. It is mathematics. The numbers do not lie, and the numbers say that humanity is our best chance for survival." Elena watched the Altarian delegation as they prepared to return to their ship and begin the process of implementing their decision. She knew that by tomorrow, the news would spread across the galaxy that one of the oldest and most respected council species had accepted human leadership. It would change everything. The Centauran merchant fleet arrived with characteristic precision, their ships arranged in perfect formation that spoke of years of trading in dangerous sectors where presentation often meant the difference between profitable negotiations and piracy. Elena watched from the diplomatic chamber as 17 vessels of various sizes settled into carefully calculated orbital positions, their hulls gleaming with the adaptive metallic surfaces that allowed Centauran ships to maximize cargo capacity while maintaining defensive capabilities.
But it was what the ships carried that truly impressed her.
In the 2 days since the Altarian delegation had returned to their fleet, the galaxy had erupted into a frenzy of diplomatic and commercial activity. The Centaurans, with their instinct for profit and opportunity, had mobilized faster than any other species. Their merchant fleet carried not just negotiation teams, but massive quantities of resources, technology, and trade goods from across their commercial network. "They're not just here to negotiate," Commander Rivera observed, studying the cargo manifest that the Centauran fleet had transmitted upon arrival. "They're here to establish permanent commercial relationships. Look at this. Rare earth elements from the Vega colonies, quantum processes from the Proxima manufacturing centers, biological samples from every world in their trade network." Dr. Sarah Chin smiled as she reviewed the Centauran delegation roster. "This is exactly what we hoped for. The Centaurans don't just see the revelation as a threat to their independence. They see it as the ultimate business opportunity. They're positioning themselves to become the primary commercial intermediaries between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Elena studied the approaching Centaurian shuttle, noting the way its hull had been modified with display panels that constantly shifted to show different trade goods and commercial opportunities. Even their diplomatic transport was essentially a mobile advertisement, designed to impress potential partners and customers. The Centauran delegation that emerged from their shuttle was led by Trademaster Corin Veltar, a being whose genetic heritage was unmistakably human despite the modifications that had adapted his species for commercial excellence. Centaurans were slightly smaller than baseline humans, with enhanced social perception that allowed them to read emotional cues and social dynamics with supernatural accuracy. Their eyes were larger than normal, better adapted for processing complex social information, and their hands had been modified with additional joints that made them incredibly dexterous at manipulating tools and devices. But what struck Elena most was the delegation's obvious excitement. Unlike the Altarians, who had approached the revelation with analytical detachment, the Centaurans radiated enthusiasm that bordered on glee. They saw opportunity where others saw crisis, profit where others saw political upheaval.
Dr. Vasquez, Trademaster Corin said, his voice carrying the persuasive undertones that characterize Centauran speech, "Let me begin by saying that the Centauran Commercial Collective views the revelation of our genetic heritage as the most significant business opportunity in galactic history." Elena blinked, momentarily taken aback by the directness of the statement.
Trademaster Corin, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we need to discuss the immediate threat situation before we can address commercial implications. But Dr. Vasquez, you're thinking like a human rather than like a Centauran. Corin replied with a smile that was both charming and calculating. For my people, everything is commerce. War is commerce, peace is commerce. Survival is commerce. The Devourer threat represents a massive market disruption that requires immediate commercial solutions.
He activated a holographic display that showed trade flow analysis across the entire galaxy, with mathematical models that tracked resource distribution, population centers, and industrial capacity. Elena realized that the Centaurans had spent the last 2 days analyzing the galactic economy with the same precision that military planners use to study battlefield tactics.
The current galactic economy is grossly inefficient, Corin continued. Each species maintains separate industrial bases, redundant research programs, and competitive resource extraction operations. The Devourer threat provides an opportunity to restructure the entire galactic economy along optimal commercial lines. Sarah stepped forward, understanding the Centauran mindset better than Elena did. Trademaster, are you proposing that the Centauran Collective would be willing to coordinate galactic resource allocation under human strategic direction?
Not just willing, Dr. Chen. Eager.
The Centaurans have been waiting for exactly this opportunity for centuries. A unified galactic economy under optimal management would increase productivity by an estimated 300% while reducing waste by 80%. The profit potential is astronomical. Elena began to see the genius of the Centauran approach. They weren't resisting human leadership. They were embracing it as a business plan. Where other species saw political subordination, the Centaurans saw economic optimization. Commander Rivera activated the tactical displays, showing the current military situation and the approaching Devourer threat. Trademaster, unified economic coordination is certainly valuable, but the immediate priority is military preparation. We need every species to place their fleets under human command. Corin studied the tactical data with obvious interest, but Elena could see him calculating commercial implications even as he processed military information. Commander, you're approaching the problem incorrectly. Military preparation is simply another form of resource allocation. The Centaurian Commercial Collective controls 60% of the galaxy's shipping capacity, 40% of industrial production, and maintains trade relationships with every council species. He gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show the vast network of commercial relationships that connected every inhabited world in the galaxy. Elena had known that the Centaurans were successful traders, but she hadn't realized the extent to which they had become the economic backbone of galactic civilization. Place the galactic economy under human strategic direction, and we can redirect industrial capacity toward military production faster and more efficiently than any traditional military mobilization. Corin continued. Our merchant fleets become logistic support. Our trade networks become intelligence-gathering systems. Our commercial relationships become diplomatic channels. Elena felt a surge of hope as she began to understand the scope of what the Centaurans were offering. They weren't just pledging their own fleets and resources. They were offering to leverage their commercial network to bring the entire galactic economy under human direction. What would you need from us in return? She asked, knowing that Centaurans never offered something for nothing.
Exclusive commercial partnerships, Corin replied immediately. The Centauran Collective becomes the sole commercial intermediary between humanity and all other galactic species.
We handle all trade negotiations, resource allocation, and economic coordination. In return, we guarantee that every council species receives economic incentives to cooperate with human military leadership.
Sarah exchanged glances with Rivera, both of them processing the implications. You're proposing to buy galactic cooperation, Sarah said.
I'm proposing to make galactic cooperation profitable, Corin corrected. Species that cooperate with human leadership receive preferential trade agreements, advanced technology transfers, and expanded market access. Species that resist face economic isolation and resource shortages. It was elegant in its simplicity. The Centaurans would use their commercial dominance to make human leadership economically advantageous for cooperative species while making resistance economically devastating. They were offering to solve the political problem of galactic unification through market forces. Elena was about to respond when the chamber's communication systems activated with an urgent alert. Leo Wei's voice filled the air with obvious tension. Dr. Pig. Vasquez, we have a problem. The Tausician fleet has arrived early, and they're not following standard diplomatic protocols. They're approaching at attack velocity and broadcasting what appears to be a formal challenge for single combat. Elena felt her stomach clench. The Tausicians were the warrior culture of the galaxy, a species designed for military excellence and personal honor. Their reaction to the revelation of genetic manipulation had been the angriest and most hostile of all the Council species. Commander Rivera immediately activated the defensive systems, and Elena could see weapon platforms emerging from concealment around the planet's surface.
How many ships? 12 vessels, including their flagship Bloodclaw.
They're broadcasting on all channels that they demand satisfaction for the dishonor of genetic manipulation and the insult of claiming authority over warrior clans. Trademaster Corin studied the tactical display with obvious concern. This is highly suboptimal for commercial negotiations. Military confrontation will disrupt trade relationships and create market instability. Elena looked at the approaching Tausician fleet, knowing that everything they had accomplished so far could be destroyed if this encounter went wrong. The Tausicians were perhaps the most influential military force in the galaxy. If they rejected human leadership and declared blood feuds, other military-oriented species would follow their example. Dr. Vasquez, Rivera said, we could destroy their fleet with the Guardian defensive systems, but that would only prove their point about human arrogance and treachery. We need a different approach. Sarah moved to the biological analysis station, calling up genetic profiles for the Tausician species. The Tausicians were designed for honor-based social structures and martial excellence. They respect strength and courage above all else. Traditional diplomacy won't work. They need to be convinced through action. Elena studied the approaching fleet, thinking about the Tausician psychology she had studied during her crash course in xenodiplomacy. They were warriors, but they were honorable warriors. They fought for principle, not conquest. Their anger wasn't really about genetic manipulation. It was about the implication that their entire martial tradition was false, that their achievements were programmed rather than earned. They need to understand that being derived from human genetics doesn't diminish their achievements, Elena said slowly. They need to see that humans respect their warrior culture and consider them equals in combat, not subjects to be commanded. Vasquez, Rivera said carefully, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Elena looked around the diplomatic chamber at the Guardians who had sacrificed millions of years to protect the galaxy, at the Centauran delegation who saw opportunity in crisis, at the holographic displays showing the approaching darkness that threatened to erase all of their achievements from history. I'm suggesting that if the Tausicians want single combat to determine the right of command, we give them exactly what they're asking for. Rivera stared at her in shock.
Elena, you're a xenoarchaeologist, not a warrior.
The Tausicians are genetically enhanced for combat. Their champion could kill you with his bare hands. Then we'd better make sure I'm not fighting with bare hands, Elena replied. Sarah, what kind of combat enhancements can the Guardian biotechnology provide? Doctor, Chen's eyes lit up with understanding. The Guardian combat systems were designed to allow humans to fight alongside enhanced species. We can provide temporary enhancements that would make you competitive with Tausician warriors, but, Elena, the risk of not trying is the destruction of galactic civilization, Elena said firmly. If we can't convince the Tausicians to accept human leadership, the military coalition will fracture before it even forms. How long would the enhancement process take? Sarah consulted her bio-integrated systems. 6 hours for basic combat enhancements. 1. 12 hours for full warrior-level modifications.
But, Elena, these modifications are temporary and they're dangerous. Your body isn't designed to handle that level of enhancement for extended periods. Elena looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Tau-Cesian fleet. They had maybe 4 hours before the ships arrived and formal challenges were issued. It would have to be enough. Begin the enhancement process and send a message to the Tau-Cesian fleet. Tell them that humanity accepts their challenge for single combat, but according to human warrior tradition, we choose the time and place of the battle.
Trademaster Corin looked distinctly uncomfortable with the proceedings. Dr. Vasquez, this level of uncertainty is very bad for market confidence. Could we perhaps resolve this through commercial arbitration instead? Alina smiled grimly as she felt the first effects of the Guardian enhancement systems beginning to alter her physiology. Trademaster, sometimes the best business decision is to prove that you're willing to fight for what you believe in. As the enhancement process continued, Elena felt her awareness expanding, her reflexes sharpening, her understanding of combat tactics deepening through direct neural programming. She was becoming something more than human, something capable of fighting on equal terms with beings designed for war. But more importantly, she was proving that humanity was willing to face any challenge, fight any battle, and sacrifice anything necessary to protect the family they had created among the stars. The Tau-Cesian fleet continued its approach, broadcasting challenges and demands for satisfaction. In a few hours, the fate of galactic civilization would be decided by single combat between a xenoarchaeologist and a warrior bred for battle. Alina had faced easier odds during her academic career, but she had never faced higher stakes. Elena stood in the center of the combat arena that the Guardians had grown from living rock in just 4 hours, feeling the Guardian enhancement systems coursing through her body like liquid fire. Her bones had been reinforced with quantum-locked crystalline structures. Her muscles had been enhanced with biomechanical fibers that increased her strength by a factor of 10. Her nervous system had been upgraded with neural accelerators that allowed her to process information and react to threats at superhuman speeds. For the first time in her life, Elena understood what it felt like to be a predator rather than prey. Across from her, Battlemaster Kresh Vorthak of the Tau-Cesian warrior clans studied her with eyes that had been designed to analyze opponents and identify weaknesses. He was 7 feet tall, with muscle mass that defied human understanding of biology, and skin that showed the ritual scars that marked his countless victories in single combat. His weapon of choice was a plasma-edged warblade that could cut through starship hull material, and he wielded it with the casual grace of someone who had been training for combat since childhood. The arena itself was surrounded by holographic displays that allowed beings across the galaxy to witness the confrontation. Representatives from every council species watched from orbital platforms, while billions more observed through live feeds that carried the event to every inhabited world. This was no longer just a diplomatic meeting. It had become the most watched event in galactic history. Human Elena Vasquez, Kresh rumbled, his voice carrying the intimidating undertones that characterized Tau-Cesian warriors. You claim the right to command the warrior clans of Tau Ceti. You claim that our martial traditions are nothing more than genetic programming imposed by your ancestors. You dishonor everything that makes us who we are. Elena activated her own weapon, a Guardian combat blade that existed in a quantum superposition between matter and energy, allowing it to cut through any material while adapting its properties to match her opponent's equipment. The Guardian enhancement systems provided her with complete tactical knowledge of Tau-Cesian combat techniques, but she knew that knowledge and experience were not the same thing. Battlemaster Kresh, Elena replied, her enhanced vocal cords carrying undertones of authority that she had never possessed before. I claim no right to diminish your achievements. The Tau-Cesian warrior tradition is one of the greatest accomplishments in galactic history. But achievement and origin are not the same thing. You are warriors because you chose to be warriors, not because genetics compelled you. Kresh raised his warblade, and Elena could see the plasma field energize along its edge. Prove it, human. Prove that you have the right to command those you claim to have created. The combat began with explosive violence that would have killed Elena instantly in her unenhanced state. Kresh moved with the speed and precision of a being designed for warfare, his blade carving through the air in patterns that could dismember multiple opponents simultaneously. But Elena's enhanced reflexes allowed her to perceive his movements as if they were happening in slow motion.
and the Guardian tactical systems provided her with precise counters for every attack. She parried his first strike with a move that sent shockwaves through the arena floor, the collision of their quantum-enhanced weapons releasing energy that lit up the chamber like a miniature star. The force of the impact would have shattered her bones if the Guardian enhancements hadn't reinforced her skeletal system with materials stronger than starship armor. "You fight well for a human," Crash acknowledged, launching into a complex attack pattern that would have overwhelmed any baseline warrior. "But fighting well is not enough. You must prove that humans deserve to lead warriors who have never known defeat." Elena responded with her own attack sequence, drawing on combat techniques that the Guardian systems had programmed directly into her muscle memory. Her blade moved in patterns that seemed to violate physics, cutting through space itself to strike from impossible angles. She was no longer fighting as a human enhanced by technology. She was fighting as something that transcended the limitations of any single species. The battle raged for 20 minutes, neither combatant able to gain decisive advantage. Crash's experience and natural combat instincts were matched by Elena's enhanced capabilities and Guardian tactical systems. They were both bleeding from minor wounds, both breathing heavily despite their enhanced physiology, both pushed to the limits of their abilities. But Elena began to realize that she was fighting the wrong battle. This wasn't about proving human superiority through combat, it was about proving human worthiness through understanding. The Tausetians didn't need to be defeated. They needed to be convinced that their warrior culture was valued and respected. During a momentary lull in the combat, Elena stepped back and deactivated her weapon. "Battlemaster Crash, I yield." The arena fell silent. Across the galaxy, billions of observers watched in shock as the human representative surrendered in the moment of single combat that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Crash held his warblade ready, confusion evident on his scarred features. "You yield, but you fight with the skill of a true warrior. Your techniques are flawless, your courage unquestionable. Why do you surrender when you could continue?" Elena removed her helmet, allowing her unenhanced human features to show clearly on the holographic displays. "Because I'm not surrendering to you, Battlemaster. I'm surrendering to the truth. You're right, humans don't have the right to command Tausetian warriors." The statement sent shockwaves through the observing delegations. Elena could hear Rivera's voice through her communication system, demanding to know what she was doing. But she pressed on, knowing that this was the only way to reach the warrior culture. "The Tausetian warrior clans have never been defeated in honest combat," Elena continued. "Your martial traditions span millions of years of honorable warfare. Your courage in battle is legendary across the galaxy. What right do humans have to command such warriors?" Crash lowered his weapon slightly, still ready for combat but clearly puzzled by the direction of the conversation. "Then you admit that human claims of authority are false?" "I admit that human claims of authority are irrelevant," Elena replied, "because the Tausetians don't need to be commanded, they need to be asked to lead." She activated her weapon again, but instead of assuming an attack stance, she reversed the blade and offered it to Crash in a gesture that every warrior culture in the galaxy would recognize as the ultimate sign of respect. "Battlemaster Crash, the Devourers are coming. They represent an enemy that doesn't understand honor, courage, or the warrior's code. They seek to absorb consciousness itself, to turn every thinking being into a component of their collective mind. The galaxy needs warriors who can resist them, warriors who understand that some things are worth fighting for even unto death." Crash studied the offered blade, his enhanced mind processing the implications of Elena's words. "You would place Tausetian warriors in command of galactic military operations? I would place Tausetian warriors where they belong, in the front lines of the most important battle in galactic history. Humans can provide strategic coordination, technological support, and logistical management, but when it comes to actual combat against the Devourers, the galaxy needs its greatest warriors leading the charge." Elena could see the moment when understanding dawned in Crash's eyes. This wasn't about human dominance or Tausetian submission. This was about combining the strengths of both species to face a threat that neither could handle alone. "You would fight alongside us as equals?" Crash asked. "I would be honored to fight alongside the greatest warriors in galactic history," Elena replied. "But only if you'll accept strategic guidance from the species that gave you the genetic foundation for your warrior culture." Crash reached out and grasped Elena's blade alongside her own hands, creating a bond that would be recognized across the galaxy as a warrior's pact. "The Tausetian clans will lead the military resistance to the Devourers. Humans will provide strategic coordination and technological support. Together, we will show these consciousness stealers what it means to face warriors who would rather die than surrender their independence. The arena erupted in cheers from the Talcesian delegation, while across the galaxy, other species began to understand the new paradigm that Elena had created. Humans wouldn't rule the galaxy through conquest or manipulation. They would lead through cooperation, combining their strategic abilities with the specialized strengths of each species they had created. Trademaster Corrin's voice came through the communication systems with obvious satisfaction. Excellent commercial outcome. Military cooperation without political subordination creates optimal market conditions for expanded trade relationships. Primary calculator, Zara. Mathematical mind had already processed the tactical implications. Joint human, Talcesian military command increases defensive effectiveness by approximately 40% while maintaining species autonomy. This is an acceptable solution. But Elena's attention was focused on the long-range sensors that continued to track the approaching darkness at the galaxy's edge. The Devourer advanced scouts were moving faster than predicted, and the main fleet would arrive months ahead of schedule. Dr. Vasquez, Commander Rivera's voice carried urgent concern. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Andromedan refugee fleet. They say the Devourers have been tracking them for 50,000 years, and their arrival in our galaxy has triggered an immediate response. The main Devourer fleet is not 18 months away. It's 18 weeks away. Elena felt the enhanced adrenaline systems flood her body with combat stimulants as the true scope of the crisis became clear. They had succeeded in uniting the major galactic species under human coordination, but they had run out of time to prepare for what was coming. All delegations, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez speaking for the Unified Galactic Command. The Devourer main fleet will arrive in 18 weeks. We have that long to transform this collection of separate species into a unified fighting force, capable of resisting an enemy that has consumed entire galaxies. She looked around the arena at the representatives of the various species, Altarians with their mathematical precision, Centaurans with their commercial networks, Talcesians with their warrior culture, and dozens of other species that had emerged from human genetic templates across millions of years of guided evolution. We are all family, separated by time and genetics, but united by purpose. Our ancestors sent us backwards through time to build a civilization strong enough to face this threat. Now, the time for preparation is over. The Devourers are coming, and we're going to show them why consciousness evolved in the first place. Not to be absorbed into some collective mind, but to stand independently, to fight for what we believe in, and to prove that the human spirit, in all its forms, cannot be conquered. The holographic displays around the arena began showing real-time updates as species across the galaxy mobilized in response to the new timeline. Fleets moved into coordinated positions. Research stations shared data that had been classified for centuries. Industrial worlds began converting their production to military supplies. For the first time in galactic history, every intelligent species was working toward the same goal, under unified command. It was humanity's greatest achievement, not the creation of galactic civilization, but its unification in the face of existential threat. Elena stood in the center of the arena, still enhanced by Guardian technology, still holding the warrior's blade that Kresh had helped her forge, and looked up at the stars where the approaching darkness carried an enemy that sought to erase the very concept of individual thought from the universe.
18 weeks to save galactic civilization.
18 weeks to prove that consciousness itself was worth preserving. 18 weeks to show the universe that humanity and its children among the stars would never surrender their independence to any force, no matter how vast or ancient. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin, and for the first time since the crisis started, Elena believed they might actually have a chance to win.